"Hey, why are you following me? The useless driver should wait in the car," the company executive Mark said, giving me a cold look. That day, there was a business meeting with a Chinese company, and I was the driver taking him to the venue. It seemed to be quite important, and the other members were the CEO, Stephen, and Daniel, serving as the interpreter. During the drive, Stephen and the others had serious expressions. However, an incident occurred along the way. Daniel fell ill unexpectedly. "Illness? Just bear with it. It's just work," Mark exclaimed, making me question if he had any compassion at all. In response, Stephen sighed in dismay. Then he looked at me and announced, "The meeting will proceed with the three of us." Upon arriving at the venue, I followed behind them, and Mark looked puzzled and asked, "Why are you following?" He didn't know why I was attending the meeting nor who I really was. "My name is David Thompson, 30 years old. I work for Company B, which is fairly large and well-known. It might sound impressive, but I'm not in glamorous departments like sales, finance, planning, or administration. I'm a driver for the company's executive." "Wow, you're going to Company B. That's amazing." An acquaintance had praised me when I got the job. When asked which department, revealing that I was a driver elicited responses like, "A driver? That's really cool," from many. Of course, I take pride in my job, but occasionally, I received lukewarm reactions that made me feel somewhat looked down upon by those actively thriving in their careers. I might feel this way partly because of the influence of Mark, the executive director. About 6 months ago, I was driving him to the airport. We got caught in traffic. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I could sense his irritation growing. It was still early morning, and he alternated between checking emails and sleeping. But each time he woke, he'd mutter, "Aren't we there yet?" with a sigh. "Hey, haven't we arrived yet?" As the traffic barely moved, Mark looked at his watch, then outside, then glanced at me through the mirror. He was getting increasingly frustrated. "I'm sorry, there's traffic. We should reach the airport in less than an hour at this pace." The traffic was slowly moving, but he, being inherently anxious, seemed unhappy and nervous. His schedule for the day was surprisingly flexible. Even with an hour's delay, there would still be over 30 minutes before his flight. He already had his e-ticket, so there was no need to wait long at the counter. Missing the flight was nearly impossible. Despite this, he couldn't help feeling anxious and started fidgeting. The vibration traveled to the driver's seat, making me feel as if I was being blamed. Despite having just updated him on the estimated arrival time, he kept checking every 5 minutes. "Aren't we there yet?" Each time I responded, he would glare at me, making me too scared to look in the rearview mirror. "Aren't you a driver? Predicting and avoiding traffic is part of your job, isn't it?" He finally erupted in anger. "I'm sorry, I tried to avoid it," I replied, my voice slightly trembling, with sweat dampening my palms inside my gloves. It didn't look like the tension in the car was going to ease up anytime soon. In fact, I had been planning the route we would take on that day for several days in advance. I could easily anticipate that it would be busy around this time, so I avoided the main roads. However, we ended up in an unusually long traffic jam on a road that's normally clear. I didn't know the reason for the jam, so I couldn't answer when he asked, "Why is it so crowded?" He kept grumbling complaints afterwards. All I could do was apologize, "I'm sorry," each time. It might have been only an hour or two, but it felt like a terribly long time before we finally got out of the jam. We arrived at the airport within 10 minutes after that. It turned out that the cause of the traffic was an accident between a car and a truck. I'm not a psychic. I couldn't have predicted that. We arrived a little earlier than the estimated time that I had told him on the way, so there were about 45 minutes left until boarding time. Still, he got out of the car irritated and muttered, "Really, this incompetent driver," as he hurried away. After that incident, he started calling me, "Hey, incompetent driver." Before that, he used to call me, "Hey, David," but it seems he always has to start with "hey." I chuckled quietly to myself, a bit of sarcasm towards myself. Guess I've moved up in the world, in a voice too low for others to hear. The younger employees would tense up and widen their eyes every time Mark called me. However, those who were my peers or seniors simply looked weary, as if to say, "Not this again." That's because Mark had been this kind of person since I joined the company. He was condescending towards those he considered beneath him and didn't hesitate to call names or hurl insults. Once someone became his target, They seemed to be treated coldly thereafter, as I had heard. Currently, it's not just me who is being looked down upon by Mark, but also a male employee named Daniel. He works as a regular employee while also serving as an interpreter. Company B often deals with foreign companies. When I'm killing time at the company's entrance during rides, I often hear a variety of languages like Chinese or Spanish. Although some employees can speak Chinese, interpreters like Daniel are necessary when the employee handling the negotiation does not speak the language to ensure smooth communication. Mark doesn't speak Chinese, but he often has opportunities to speak with big foreign companies due to his position. He takes Daniel with him on such occasions, but far from appreciating his interpreter, he demands compliance with his selfish nonsense. You're just an interpreter. Remember, there are plenty of others who can replace you. Don't think you're someone competent at your job, he says. Daniel whispered to me once, sounding resigned. I face the same issue. It's often left off that anyone can get a driver's license. Hearing that, I internally fumed, then drive yourself, but I kept my mouth shut. He was the executive director. It's easy to imagine what would happen if I opposed him. One day, there was a meeting for a transaction. It seemed quite important, and I was to drive a group including the CEO Stephen, Mark, and Daniel. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, while Stephen and Mark took the back seats. The counterpart for this meeting is a Chinese company, right? Yes, if things go well, it could lead to profits of $1 million. I caught a glimpse of that conversation in the rearview mirror. They were talking seriously, arms crossed. $1 million? I wondered if the employees would get a bonus if that happened. I drove on, idly thinking about it. The venue for the meeting was a rented conference room in downtown New York. This day was a rare opportunity to align schedules with the overseas company. With time differences and other issues, scheduling with foreign companies is challenging. This time, the other party happened to be in the US for another matter and had managed to make time for this meeting. There was absolutely no room for being late or canceling, especially with the worrisome Mark on board. So we headed to the venue with plenty of time to spare. Perhaps it was because Stephen was nearby, but Mark checked the time and the scenery outside less often than usual. I thought we'd arrive smoothly, but a problem occurred along the way. It was about an hour left until the meeting. Let's take a break, suggested Stephen. We stopped by at a cafe. Suddenly, Daniel complained of a stomach ache. Excuse me, I need to step out. He rushed to the restroom but didn't come back even after more than 10 minutes. When I checked the time, there were only 45 minutes left until the meeting. The venue was just a few minutes walk from the cafe. We were not yet late. However, Mark began to look visibly irritated. It might be a habit, as he couldn't stop fidgeting, and the sound of his shoes tapping the floor rhythmically could be heard. I watched his feet nervously. Stephen noticed this too and frowned slightly. Is he not back yet? What is he doing? He muttered, and his voice clearly reached us all. There's no point in saying that. Illness isn't something you can predict. Stephen tried to calm him. Mark sharply raised his eyebrows and glared. Stephen, we absolutely can't afford to be late today, he retorted strongly, and we all went silent. I couldn't say anything, just switching my gaze between the two of them. Then a cafe staff member approached us in a hurry. Your companion has collapsed in front of the restroom. What? Stephen exclaimed, widening his eyes. According to the staff, Daniel was sweating profusely and seemed to be in a daze. Should we call an ambulance? When it was suggested we call for medical help, Stephen nodded in agreement. Then, after the meeting, we should go to the hospital as well. That's ridiculous. We can't proceed without an interpreter, Mark protested, slamming the table and standing up abruptly. Sweat was lightly beading on his forehead. Stephen touched his forehead and said again soothingly, There's nothing we can do. It's an emergency, but Mark seemed unsatisfied and loudly exclaimed, but the other customers in the cafe turned their eyes towards us. It's just a stomach ache. He should endure it. This is work, after all. The lack of empathy in his words left me astonished. Stephen sighed deeply, looking weary. I could see the frustration etched in his features as he struggled to maintain his composure. Mark, there are limits to what one can endure, especially when it comes to health. Daniel is in no condition to continue. We have to adapt and find a solution, he asserted. Mark's face twisted in anger, but he knew Stephen had a point. Grudgingly, he acquiesced. Fine, but who's going to interpret? We can't afford a miscommunication with such high stakes." Stephen turned to me, eyes sharp and calculating. "David, how much Chinese do you know?" Startled, I replied, "Just the basics, sir. Enough to understand a few phrases and words." Mark scoffed, "And what good will that do?" Ignoring him, Stephen continued, "We have no other option. David, you'll have to assist as much as you can. We'll also use translation apps if needed. It's not ideal, but it's our only choice." I nodded, though I felt a mix of fear and excitement. This was way beyond my usual duties, and the responsibility was immense. We hurried to the meeting venue, arriving just in time. The Chinese delegates were already there, waiting patiently. As we entered the room, the atmosphere was tense but professional. Stephen and Mark greeted the delegates, and I stood behind them, trying to appear confident. The meeting began, and I was thrown into the deep end. The conversation was rapid and filled with technical jargon, but I did my best to keep up. Stephen guided me, and we relied heavily on translation apps for more complex sentences. Despite the initial awkwardness, the meeting progressed smoothly. Stephen's calm demeanor and Mark's aggressive negotiation tactics created a balance. I struggled but managed to convey basic points, and the delegates seemed to understand the situation, showing surprising patience and understanding. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting concluded. Stephen shook hands with the Chinese representatives, smiling. "Thank you for your understanding. We appreciate your patience." As the delegates left, Mark turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You did better than I expected," he admitted grudgingly. "But don't get used to it. You're still just a driver." Stephen, however, patted my shoulder. "Good job, David. You saved us today." I felt a sense of pride and relief wash over me. Maybe I was just a driver, but today I had proven that I was more than that. I had stepped up when needed, and it felt good. As we left the venue, I couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. Mark might never change, but I realized that I didn't need his approval to feel validated. I had my own worth, and that was enough. The drive back to the office was quiet. Mark was absorbed in his thoughts, and Stephen seemed contemplative. I focused on the road, a slight smile playing on my lips. Today had been a test, and I had passed it. Later, as I parked the car, Stephen leaned forward and said softly, "You have more potential than you think, David. Don't let anyone, especially Mark, make you believe otherwise." I nodded, feeling a newfound determination. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." With those words, I realized that while my job might be humble, my spirit didn't have to be. I could rise above the challenges, no matter how unexpected, and prove my worth not just to others but to myself. And that was the most important lesson of all. The aftermath of the meeting left a lingering tension in the air. Mark, despite his begrudging acknowledgement, avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the day. It was clear he was struggling with the realization that his overbearing attitude had not only failed to solve the crisis, but had also been outshone by a mere driver stepping up to the plate. In the following days, the office buzzed with the news of the successful negotiation. Word spread about how we had almost lost the deal due to Daniel's sudden illness and how I, with my basic Chinese skills and the help of translation apps, had somehow managed to hold things together. My colleagues looked at me with a newfound respect, and even some of the senior staff who had always kept their distance now gave me nods of acknowledgement. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, Stephen called me into his office. I walked in, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. His office was spacious and neatly organized, with a large mahogany desk that held a few personal items. Family photos, a couple of awards, and a sleek laptop. "David, have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. I sat down, my hands resting on my lap. Stephen leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment before he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the meeting. You stepped up in a way that most people wouldn't have. That kind of initiative and ability to stay calm under pressure is rare." "Thank you, sir," I replied, feeling a flush of pride. "Which is why I want to offer you an opportunity," he continued. "I believe you have the potential to do more than just drive. I want you to consider taking some additional training, language courses, perhaps even some basic negotiation skills. It would mean more responsibility, but it would also open doors for you here." I was stunned. The offer was beyond anything I had imagined. "I don't know what to say, sir. This is an incredible opportunity. Thank you," Stephen smiled. You earned it, David, but there's something else I want to discuss. It's about Mark. My heart sank a little. Mark was a constant thorn, and any conversation about him usually spelled trouble. What about him? I asked cautiously. Stephen sighed. Mark's attitude is a problem. It's something I've been aware of for a while, but the recent events have highlighted it even more. His behavior towards you and others is unacceptable, and it's affecting the team's morale. I'm considering having a serious talk with him, but I wanted to get your perspective first. This was unexpected. Stephen was asking for my input on how to handle Mark. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Mark is difficult to work with, I began carefully. He doesn't respect those he considers beneath him, and his attitude creates a toxic environment. However, he's also competent at his job, which makes it a tricky situation. Stephen nodded, listening intently. Do you think there's a way to address his behavior constructively? Maybe, I said slowly. If he could see the impact of his actions and understand that it's not just about getting results, but also about how we work together as a team, it might help. But honestly, it would require a significant change in his mindset. I appreciate your honesty, David, Stephen said. I'll take your thoughts into account. In the meantime, let's focus on your development. I'll arrange for you to start some language courses, and we can discuss other training options as we go. Leaving Stephen's office, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity to advance my career was thrilling, but the situation with Mark loomed over everything. Despite his harsh demeanor, he was still a key figure in the company, and any conflict with him could have serious repercussions. A few days later, I started my language classes. Balancing work and study was challenging, but I was determined to make the most of this chance. The classes were intensive, but I enjoyed them, finding a new passion for learning. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and their support made the transition smoother. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior didn't improve. If anything, he seemed more irritable, likely sensing the shifting dynamics within the team. His frustration often boiled over into angry outbursts, particularly directed at those who didn't meet his unrealistic expectations. Yet, despite his volatility, I began to notice small cracks in his facade, moments of doubt and insecurity that peeked through his tough exterior. One evening, as I was leaving the office late, I saw Mark sitting alone in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee. It was unusual to see him without his usual bravado, and I hesitated before approaching him. Long day? I asked, trying to sound casual. Mark looked up, surprised. Yeah, you could say that, he replied gruffly, his voice lacking its usual edge. I took a seat across from him, studying his face. For the first time, I saw more than just the arrogant, abrasive man who had made my life difficult. There was a weariness in his eyes, a hint of something deeper. You know, I began slowly. I never expected to be doing anything other than driving. But that meeting changed things for me. It made me realize I could do more, be more. I think the same could be true for you, Mark. He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. What are you getting at, David? I think you're capable of a lot, but your approach is holding you back. The way you treat people, it's not helping. If you could find a way to channel your skills without the hostility, I think you'd be surprised at the results. Mark scoffed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Easy for you to say, you're the hero of the hour. Everyone thinks you're the next big thing. That's not true, I said firmly. I'm just trying to do my job, same as you. But I've realized that respect and teamwork are just as important as competence. We can't achieve our goals if we're constantly at each other's throats. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. It's not that simple, he muttered. You don't know what it's like? The pressure? The expectations? I've worked so hard to get here, and it's like I'm always one step away from losing it all. I get it, I said softly, but isolating yourself and pushing others away isn't the answer. We all have our struggles, but we can face them better together. Maybe you could start by giving people a chance, by showing a bit of trust and respect. Mark didn't respond, but his eyes had softened. I decided not to push further and stood up to leave. Think about it, I said as I walked away. You might find it makes things a little easier. Over the next few weeks, I focused on my studies and my work, immersing myself in the language courses and gradually taking on more responsibilities. Stephen's encouragement and the support of my colleagues spurred me on, and I began to feel more confident in my ability. Mark's behavior remained erratic, but there were occasional glimpses of change. He still had his outbursts, but they were less frequent, and he seemed to be making an effort to communicate more respectfully, at least some of the time. It was a small but significant shift. One day, Stephen called me into his office again. This time, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. He began with a smile. "I have some good news. The board has approved your promotion. You'll be moving into a new role, focusing on client relations and negotiations. Your language skills and your performance have impressed everyone." I was elated. This was more than I had ever dreamed of. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Stephen said, "but there's one more thing. I've decided to have that talk with Mark. It's time for a change, and I believe you're the right person to help me with this. Your insight and your ability to see beyond the surface are invaluable." The meeting with Mark was scheduled for the next day. Stephen and I sat in his office waiting for Mark to arrive. When he walked in, his expression was guarded, clearly expecting the worst. "Mark, please sit down." Stephen, "We need to talk." Mark sat, glancing nervously between us. "What's this about?" Stephen took a deep breath. "Mark, your performance has been strong, but your approach to leadership has been problematic. Your behavior towards your colleagues, particularly David, has created a toxic environment. This cannot continue." Mark's face reddened, but he remained silent, waiting for Stephen to continue. "I believe you have the potential to be a great leader," Stephen said, "but you need to change your approach. David has suggested that you might benefit from some coaching and support to help you develop better interpersonal skills. We're willing to invest in that, but you need to be open to it." Mark looked at me, a mixture of anger and resignation in his eyes. "You think I need coaching?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "I think we all have room to grow," I said evenly. "I've had to learn a lot myself recently." "This isn't about singling you out, Mark. It's about making us all better as a team." There was a long pause. Then Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll give it a try." It was the start of a new chapter. Mark began his coaching sessions, and though the road ahead was uncertain, there was a sense of cautious optimism. As for me, I embraced my new role with enthusiasm, fully aware of the challenges and opportunities it presented. The transition wasn't easy, but the support from Stephen and my colleagues made a significant difference. In the months that followed, the company saw substantial improvements in both morale and performance. My language skills allowed us to secure new international clients, and my approach to client relations fostered stronger partnerships. The work was demanding, but I thrived on the challenges, constantly pushing myself to learn and grow. Mark's progress was slower, but noticeable. His coaching sessions gradually softened his rough edges, and he started to show a genuine effort to connect with his team. There were setbacks, of course, old habits die hard, but the overall trajectory was positive. He began to earn the respect of his colleagues, not through fear, but through a growing sense of fairness and collaboration. One particularly memorable project came when we landed a major contract with a Chinese firm. The negotiations were complex, requiring not only linguistic skills but also a deep understanding of cultural nuances. I spent weeks preparing, working closely with our legal and financial teams to ensure every detail was meticulously addressed. The day of the final negotiation arrived, and as I walked into the boardroom, I felt a surge of confidence. The room was filled with senior executives from both companies, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. I began my presentation, seamlessly switching between English and Chinese, addressing concerns and highlighting the mutual benefits of the partnership. As the meeting progressed, I noticed Mark observing from the back of the room. His presence was a reminder of how far we had come. The negotiations concluded successfully, and the sense of achievement was palpable. As we exited the boardroom, Mark approached me, extending his hand. "Well done, David," he said, a genuine smile on his face. "You handled that brilliantly." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, shaking his hand. It was a team effort. The successful negotiation marked a turning point not just for me, but for the entire company. It opened doors to new opportunities and cemented our reputation as a global player. Stephen's faith in me had been validated, and the sense of camaraderie within the team was stronger than As the weeks turned into months, my responsibilities continued to grow. I traveled frequently, meeting clients, attending conferences, and representing the company at various international forums. Each trip was a learning experience, broadening my horizons and deepening my understanding of the business world. Back at the office, the changes in Mark were becoming more evident. He was more approachable, more willing to listen, and his interactions with the team had become constructive rather than combative. The coaching sessions had clearly made an impact, and the environment in the office was much more positive as a result. One evening, after returning from a particularly exhausting trip, I found a note on my desk. It was from Mark. "David, thank you for your patience and for believing in me. Your support has made a difference. Let's continue to build something great together." Mark, reading the note, I felt a sense of fulfillment. The journey had been challenging, but seeing the transformation in Mark and the positive changes in the company made it all worthwhile. It was a reminder that leadership isn't just about individual success, but about lifting others and fostering an environment where everyone can thrive. As I settled back into my routine, I continued to focus on my development and the growth of the company. Stephen remained a steadfast mentor, always ready with advice and encouragement. My colleagues, too, were an invaluable source of support, and the bonds we had formed through our shared experiences were unbreakable. Looking back, the journey from driver to executive had been anything but conventional. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of seizing opportunities, and the impact of positive leadership. The lessons I had learned along the way shaped not only my career, but also my outlook on life. In the end, the story wasn't just about a single meeting that changed everything. It was about the continuous journey of growth, the challenges that tested our resolve, and the people who walked the path with it. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there is always a way forward, and that with the right mindset and support, we can achieve more than we ever thought possible. As I stood by the window of my office looking out at the city lights, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road ahead was still long and filled with challenges, but I was ready. With the lessons of the past as my guide and the support of my team, I knew there was nothing we couldn't overcome together. As the months turned into years, the company continued to grow and evolve, driven by our collective efforts and the foundation of respect and collaboration we had built. My role expanded further, encompassing strategic planning and high-stakes negotiations that took me to every corner of the globe. With each success, my confidence grew, and I became a key figure in shaping the future of the company. Mark's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. He had fully embraced the coaching and personal development initiatives, and his leadership style had undergone a profound change. No longer the abrasive figure who had alienated his colleagues, he became a mentor and a source of inspiration for many. His ability to connect with people, understand their strengths, and bring out the best in them was now his defining trait. One significant milestone came when we decided to expand our operations into the burgeoning markets of South America. The project was ambitious, requiring extensive research, strategic partnerships, and a deep understanding of the local business landscape. I was appointed to lead the initiative, and it quickly became apparent that this would be one of the most challenging yet rewarding undertakings of my career. The first step was to assemble a team of experts who could navigate the complexities of the South American market. I reached out to colleagues across various departments, seeking individuals with the right skills and a shared vision for success. Mark was instrumental in this process, leveraging his newfound people skills to help identify and recruit the best talent. As we embarked on this journey, we faced numerous obstacles. The political and economic climates in some countries were unstable, and navigating the regulatory frameworks was a daunting task. However, our team's dedication and expertise, coupled with the support from our leadership, enabled us to make steady progress. We forged partnerships with local businesses, established a robust supply chain, and gradually built a strong presence in the region. One memorable trip took me to Brazil, where I met with potential partners and government officials to discuss our expansion plans. The meetings were intense, requiring careful negotiation and a deep understanding of the cultural nuances. I spent hours preparing, drawing on my language skills and the insights I had gained from previous experiences. The culmination of these efforts was a landmark agreement that opened the doors to significant new opportunities. Returning to the office after this success, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The South American expansion was not just a business achievement. It was a testament to the power of teamwork, resilience, and the willingness to embrace change. It also highlighted the importance of leadership that empowers and inspires others. Back in the office, the atmosphere was charged with excitement and anticipation. The successful expansion had boosted morale, and there was a palpable sense of pride in our collective achievements. Stephen, always the visionary, called a company-wide meeting to celebrate our success and outline the next steps. Standing before my colleagues, I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. This success is a testament to what we can achieve when we work together, I said, addressing the room. It's not just about business growth. It's about the relationships we've built, the challenges we've overcome, and the future we are creating together. Thank you for your hard work and dedication. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as I looked around, I saw the faces of the people who had become more than just colleagues. They were friends, mentors, and partners in this journey. Mark, standing off to the side, gave me a nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement of how far we had come together. The years continued to pass, each bringing new challenges and opportunities. Our company evolved, adapting to the ever-changing business landscape, while staying true to the values that had driven our success. Stephen eventually retired, passing the torch to a new generation of leaders who were ready to build on his legacy. As for me, my journey from driver to executive had come full circle. I had grown not just as a professional but as a person, learning valuable lessons about leadership, empathy, and the importance of fostering a positive and inclusive work environment. The challenges we faced and the successes we celebrated were all part of a larger narrative of growth and transformation. One evening, as I sat in my office reflecting on the journey, I received a call from Mark. "David, I've been thinking about everything we've accomplished," he said. "It's been an incredible journey, hasn't it?" "It has," I agreed, "and it's only just beginning. There's so much more we can do, so many more heights we can reach." "You're right," Mark said. "Let's keep pushing forward together." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of fulfillment and anticipation. The road ahead was still long, filled with new challenges and endless possibilities. But with the lessons of the past as my guide and the support of a dedicated and talented team, I knew we were ready to face whatever came our way. The story of our journey was one of transformation, resilience, and the power of human connection. It was a reminder that no matter where we start, with the right mindset and support, we can achieve extraordinary things.